Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Hermann Pretorius. Hermann, how are you?
I am well, thank you. You invited me onto the show with a prospectus of being able to geek out about the house of cards that is Westminster politics. So I'm in my happy place, and if we don't spend sufficient time on it, I might just go full ANC and assassinate you.
Well, I specifically didn't want to talk about that until we had you on, because then I thought we'd get the most mileage out of the episode then. I was hoping that we'd be able to put you on at the same time as Gabriel, because I think he disagrees with you on some of the trajectory of this stuff, so it would have been nice to watch you two squabble. But anyway, unfortunately, that's not going to be a reality, because we have Ms. Sara gone, who is far more restrained.
And I think the word is ignorant.
I don't know about that, but welcome, Sara. Good to have you back.
Thank
you. Anyway, let us, before we go overseas and talk about the UK, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in South Africa. So today is a big day for many families across the country. In the coastal provinces, it's the first day of school, and I think it's very soon going to also be in the opening of school for the inland provinces. I can't remember what order it's going in. Anyway, point is, schools are all starting up. Right. Schools are all starting up. And we're going to be getting our matric results tomorrow evening, which is after we stream our show, so we won't be able to really go onto it in detail tomorrow. But I think it's worth sort of reviewing where we are with the education situation, because it is one of the big important things in the country and a thing that many people care about, no matter whether they're rich, poor, black, white, whatever. This is something that everyone in South Africa, I think, is very concerned about. So we do have the matric results from the Independent Examination Board schools. So that's basically the private schools. And as per usual, they had a very successful year in terms of matric passes, with 98% passing after what the media describes as an emotionally tough year, emotionally and mentally tough year. I think that's probably true, because I know a lot of students had their schooling disrupted by COVID. And more important than the pass rate is the bachelor pass rate, which is a higher level of pass. It's the highest level of pass you can get from the National Senior Certificate qualification. And that's, I think, really what we should consider the real benchmark of passing, because that's actually something that can allow you to get somewhere with your high school without a lot of problems. And that for the IEB schools was 89.2%. So also pretty good score there. And then the rest were qualified with a diploma level pass and a higher certificate level pass, which are the lesser grades. So as I'm sure we're going to be seeing the results soon, let me start with you, Hermann. What do you expect from the government pass rate and the announcement of the matric results there? Of course, we had a disrupted year last year, so they might be a little bit lower than usual. What should we make of all this?
Well, I think the first thing that we should understand is that poor kids aren't stupid, and rich kids aren't smart. And the discrepancy in results that we'll see between private schools and public schools, really, when we see that, we shouldn't go, oh, the country is going to the dogs. It really is a case of opportunities and resources. John Kane Berman a few years ago did quite a great case study of a low fee paying township school that he compared to public schools in the vicinity. And the low fee paying township school, not at all one of your high flying IEB fancy schmancy, schools where ANC cadres send their kids to, not that kind of school. They had similar pass rates to your best independent schools by double digits in terms of percentage points to their peers, who really are just, from the same collection of communities, from the same socioeconomic bracket. perhaps slightly higher, but not significant enough to draw an IQ line between the poor stupid and the poor smart. So what we should understand here is that the discrepancy between these two results are not down to kids being stupid. It is down to policies that either promote quality education or not. Now, we are free marketeers. Does the free market offer a solution to everything? No. But I think to education, the argument is quite clear, even in South Africa. And you don't even have to make it an economic argument, although you can. It's an interesting discussion to have. You can just make it a parental rights argument. No one who's spoken to a mother from Mamelodi or Atteridgeville unhappy that her child was placed in a school far removed from their commute to work and therefore essentially parentless for large parts of the working week. No one can come to that conclusion that those people deserve to be treated thusly. 2 years ago in January, around this time, the IRR launched a campaign about school vouchers, how to give parents educational input and educational empowerment, really. And every single call I got was from a Black mother in either the poorest parts of Johannesburg or the poorest parts of Pretoria. So it really is down to these kids being failed by a system that is so hollowed out by cadre deployment, by unions chasing after their own tails, that when you see those results and you see possibly, we'll probably see an uptick in the overall passes, but that's also, I'd never trust that because that's really down to some number fiddling quite often. We have to understand that only 5% of the grade ones, the class of 2009, no, I'm going mad. What's 12 years ago? 2000, yeah, it was the class of 2009. Only 5% of the class of 2009 will pass their matric last year with 50% or above in a subject like mathematics, in an economy where almost a quarter now of jobs are in the financial services sector. So these kids are not stupid. They are being failed and they are being made failures by a government just chucking them under the school bus because they don't trust parents. They think Black South African parents, the greatest victims of this sort of nanny state, they think Black South African parents are numbskulls and stupid and can't decide where to send their kids or what would be in their best interest. So when you see those results and you see the discrepancies, don't jump to the easy conclusion that many soft racists jump to think that, kids are just stupider, because there's a surprise in that IB numbers are no longer so lily white and public school numbers aren't down to kids being stupid. There's very, very good data on that.
So, Sara, there's this sort of weird idea out there that private school is really, for rich people. I think Hermann was really talking about this. Actually, a surprisingly robust market when it's allowed by governments to actually flourish in quality, cheap education. I think of a place like India where I think this kind of stuff has been quite successful, and even some parts of Africa, much poorer countries than us, have managed to achieve quite spectacular results with low-fee private schools. So firstly, your thoughts on that, and secondly, your thoughts in general on the state of our education system and the quality of our education system.
Yeah, I think you've got a fairly good chance if you send a child to one of the cheaper private schools that belongs to a group of schools. In other words, if they've made it their business to provide schooling to their clients, and there are the clients, their customers. I think the problem is the sort of usually the inner city colleges or schools or whatever call themselves that have no particular connection to any grouping that can be monitored and investigated. You get some real shysters operating those skills, and that's a tragedy for kids who
the so-called fly-by-night schools.
Yeah,
the government is very keen to hunt those down.
Yeah, you need, like most other things in this sort of, let's call it the illicit schooling situation, you need a government to really be able to crack down on that. And I think they manage to do it with some, but they don't manage to do it with all. So that's an area that actually has to be looked at constantly. What I've gathered from the sort of growth of schools who are in the business of creating fee-paying, low fee-paying private schools is that they are popular. They are becoming more popular. They are reliable. I don't have an overall or detailed sense of their achievements, but they're definitely an option, and there's the sort of option that the provincial authorities, particularly in places like Gauteng, where you have a huge number of people coming into the system every year. I think one of the ways, probably the only way you can sort out the quality of education in townships is by creating space for an untrammeled space for the private sector to operate, because as you said earlier, the quality of public education, particularly in township schools, has just deteriorated more and more. And the only thing that makes a difference in public schooling is the quality of the principal and the quality of the management of the teachers that work under that principal. And you cited John Van Berman's research on that. And it seems to be that the key thing in good education is not your resources. It's not, going to a huge, very expensive private school and having every bell and whistle, but it's about having a principal with teachers who are really prepared to commit and to get children, really put pressure on children to force them to come to school on Saturdays for extra lessons, etc. That is your most important, your most important element to achieving good results. And the problem, of course, is that the public sector has very few of those people, and their lives are often made more complex by recalcitrant trade unions who represent teachers who do not exactly bring the best to their environment, but who are protected because of the sheer size of the union movement. And the government is caught up in that sort of self-perpetuating cycle from one schooling year to another. You do have to ask after, I think Angie Motshekga has been in the position as Minister of Basic Education, or whatever it was once called, for probably 2 decades. This is where your cadre deployment becomes a problem. There has long since passed the point where schooling has deserved somebody who can bring something new and energetic to the sector. And it's not to say she's a bad person or a terrible person, but whatever, she hasn't been able to deal with the trade unions, who are known to have captured at least 6 of the provincial education departments. So I think until you get some real change and somebody really in who can bring real change, one's always going to question the results on the basis of, have they been adjusted in order to make the past results palatable when they are in fact not palatable.
Hermann, any final thoughts?
Yes. I think there are two final thoughts. Number one is that there's this truism out there, which is quite platitudinous in the sense that it claims that education is the silver bullet. Now, education is a bullet, but I don't think it's the silver bullet. So, just fixing the schools won't fix South Africa's problem, and I think that's possibly even the wrong way to go about it. And I say that because there's some historical precedent here. Just after the American Civil War, your newly freed black slaves in the South of America really faced a dire situation. They were former slaves, so they were very, very, very poor. They were illiterate. They were innumerate in the sense that they just had nothing going for them. On top of that, you had local state governments imposing black codes, where incidentally one of the first instances of gun control came in, that black former slaves may not own firearms. But what you see between 1860 and 1960 is a wonderful data trajectory, where every generation from these freed slaves, their kids and grandchildren and so on, for 100 years, with essentially, in many cases, illegal or schooling made illegal for them. You see every generation, more literate, more numerate, and more able to be socially upwardly mobile. And that ironically ends in about the 1960s. It plateaus. The standards of progress for the former the descendants of former slaves, and then that trend actually starts going down again in the 70s. Ironically, when Lyndon B. Johnson starts his war on poverty, where the state really starts intervening, trying to give these people the help that white people in Washington thought they needed. It reverses a trend of 100 years. Of number one, people doing it themselves under incredibly harsh circumstances, often legal impediments placed on education. And number two, people who are themselves, and let's not beat about the bush, who were themselves considered to be savages, who couldn't read, who couldn't write, but parents who had more wisdom than someone like Lyndon B. Johnson, because they understood what their kids needed to have a better life. And what would often happen is that in the South, these former slaves would rely on preachers from the Methodists and the Baptist churches to teach their kids to read and write and count. So the 2 points that I want to make is, number one, it was the economic freedom that made it possible for these people to actually make progression. It wasn't that they first received a good education and then economic freedom and upward mobility followed from that. No, I think it's actually the other way around. The slaves were first freed, then with a minimal freedom that even they got from that, they made manifest this cross-generational progress. So that's number one, is I don't think education is the silver bullet. It is a bullet, but I think if you're going to talk about, what will really win this war, it is real economic freedom, people being able to earn and spend to improve their lives. That's point number one. Number two is that the state getting involved is a deterrent, but we know it can work when the state is actually there to provide resources and not to micromanage syllabi, as we are seeing in South Africa. And the third point, and this is a direct appeal to people watching this, listening to this, the churches and religious communities, the synagogues, the mosques, there's an opportunity here for those entities, not just in their own interest to become socially relevant again, but if you look at history and you really look at when the poorest people were uplifted, whether it's in the Jewish history or the Christian West, you see it is primarily through churches and temples and synagogues and religious authorities becoming involved, not with or without the permission of the state, at actually getting a stake in the community where they are planted, where they want to spread their truth. And when I say their truth, I'm not into the social justice, your truth, my truth, their truth. It's just what they consider to be gospel, without putting too fine a spin on it. So those are the three things: not a silver bullet, economic freedom rather than state involvement. And perhaps there's a role here for churches and members of churches to push for this. If you don't trust the education system in this country, perhaps get involved and perhaps go to your religious community, because I'm sure other parents will feel the same.
Well, Herman, if you complained later that we didn't have enough time to discuss the British stuff, you know why. Anyway, thank you for your input, because it was, I think, very good. But let's move on to our next story. I think we'll probably revisit the matric results when they're actually out, maybe next week, but we'll see. And we're now, of course, going to discuss something which I don't know how much there is to say, except that it's outrageous. And this is a threat by the economic freedom fighters. Well, not a threat, a planned visit, which I think they have currently or just conducted as we're speaking, to visit a restaurant in Midrand, I think at the Mall of Africa, where they're going to ask they've asked the management to provide them with a report of how many employees they have who are foreign nationals and how many are South Africans, because they're going to be checking the ratio to ensure that it's suitable to the EFF or something. So here's what the EFF tweeted today. Commander-in-Chief Julius Malema will conduct a visit to restaurants to check the employment ratio between South African citizens and foreign nationals. Let the enemy not distort our message. We are not fighting our fellow Africans. In fact, we are protecting them. The DA's spokesperson on Labour, Michael Carter, said that this was workplace terrorism. Sara, what do you make of this?
I think it's a mafiosi-style shakedown, actually. However he wants to couch it, because there are no laws that prevent legal foreigners from taking jobs. There are no laws that say South Africans must be given jobs over legal foreigners. There is no list he can draw up and rely on. He can draw up and rely on as many lists as he likes, but there's absolutely nothing he can do with them unless he tends to mount an attack on the restaurant itself and start killing people. I don't know what he wants to do this for, other than to look like the African nationalist, South African bigot that he really is. And it's particularly funny given the fact that the EFF of all the parties believes that we should have no borders in Africa. No, it must be a borderless zone, which by implication means that anyone can come and go across the borderless zone and theoretically be employed anywhere in the borderless zone.
It seems like the EFF have done a sort of weird pretzel-shaped U-turn here, because they were saying no borders right up until the election, and now suddenly they're saying no, we mustn't just have correct ratios of foreigners to South Africans in workplaces. We must also have correct ratios as according to tribal group and province of origin. Like what is it Malema said? There mustn't be too many Zulus with jobs in Limpopo and vice versa for Durban. I mean, what is going on there?
I mean, the beauty of this is that unlike BEE, there aren't rules governing what you've just mentioned. And so the only reason for him doing it is to put pressure on, scare people, scare employers to employ locals. And how he's going to keep monitoring that, I don't know. But with any luck, he'll commit an offence sooner rather than later, and the police may respond timeously, and we may actually get him facing yet another charge. More than that, I think it doesn't warrant our brilliant laser-like minds attention.
Yes, well, I hope that's an accurate description of us. Herman, what is up with the EFF's weird flip-flopping on the issue of foreigners and immigrants?
I can answer in 2 words. It's essentially Hermann Mashaba. I think that Action SA has outflanked them on the strong on immigration messaging that should terrify them, because in a way, I mean, what's that rule about the Nazis coming into a discussion? But let's be honest, National Socialism is alive and well in the EFF. I'm not saying it's, the German version. I'm not saying they necessarily hate the Jews. They hate many more people. So they are more diverse in their Nazism. But they are nationalists. Make no bones about it. They are nationalists because you have to be a sort of identitarian collectivist, and the nation being the most obvious identity to latch onto if you want to have socialism, because you have to draw the borders of this influence of the kibbutz or the collective or the commune somewhere. And it's an easy border to draw it nationally, because that's a pre-existing acknowledged legal border. So if you are going to be a socialist, you have to, at the end of the day, eat a certain portion of nationalism. Now, the problem with nationalism is that it is a hop, skip, and a jump away from nationalism to tribalism to ethnicism to just, the complete breakdown of any form of societal cohesion. It is the old Albert Muller, is it Moller? I can't remember who it was. Niemöller. It was Niemöller. Yeah. First they came for the so-and-so, and I wasn't a so-and-so, so I shut up. And so the problem with some sort of socioeconomic collective that socialists demand, the socialist policy demands, is that you run into, at some point, drawing an identitarian collective, and in this case, it's the nationalist one. And of course, the problem that Sara points out is there is no law. It's not illegal to hire a legal immigrant, and in many cases, the foreigners in South Africa deliver far greater economic benefits than locals, citizens who have been caught into the poverty trap of the social grant system, because these people can't rely on their income from SASA, so they have to make do. And that's the wonderful thing about the free market. It has its ills, but at core, if you want to eat, you need to serve your neighbor. And that's what these people quite often do much better.
This reminds me of of Muammar Gaddafi, who, of course, especially later on in his life, tried to transform himself into the foremost champion of a united Africa and Pan-Africanism. But through all of his life, in practical terms, was very much a nationalist who did things like invade his neighbors, famously invaded Chad, that kind of thing. And I think the EFF is kind of running into the same roadblock as one of their heroes here, which is that it's kind of difficult to be a Pan-Africanist and a nationalist at the same time. Anyway, I hope that voters see the flip-flopping here and punish them for it. But anyway, let's move on to our final story before Hermann frosted them out too much, and that is what's been going on in the UK. So Prime Minister Boris Johnson is accused of attending a work function or work party or something, a garden party, which was at the time sort of illegal under government COVID regulations. So in other words, at the height of the pandemic, when famously the Queen had to sit alone in the funeral of her husband, apparently the government was pretty much breaking, at least the Prime Minister may have been breaking those rules. Now, he has said that he was there, but he said that he didn't quite realize what it was, and he was only there for 20 minutes and then he left. But there's now a huge battle in his own party, with one faction trying to get him to resign and the other hoping that he will weather the storm. Herman?
Yeah,
is Boris gone?
Well, not yet. One thing I just want to quickly touch on the previous topic that I see in the comments is Whiskey Jack saying nationalism is a big part of the story of Western development and economic growth. Yes and no. Be careful not to conflate the nation state stabilizing as a constitutional entity with nationalism. Those two are quite distinct, and confusing them doesn't help anyone in this discussion. In terms of Boris, is he gone? Not quite yet, but the real problem he faces is, Nick, you mentioned that a faction wants to get rid of him. That's not quite the case. This is why his position is more dangerous than Theresa May's. In Theresa May, in the case of Theresa May, there was a very clear, the so-called Brexit Spartans was a faction who wanted to get rid of her for selling out on Brexit. Now we are actually looking across these, Brexit lines, north, south, all the dividing lines that you can draw or over the Conservative Party as an entity. You are getting feed, drip, drip, drip from all of them that Johnson is plummeting in his popularity ratings. And the shock today, of course, is that even amongst the intake of 2019, the election, the Boris election, where he stumped to an 86-seat majority, even among that intake, we are facing people who have sent in their letters to the so-called 1922 committee, the backbench committee of the Conservative Party in Parliament that controls leadership elections. So those letters mean that if enough are reached, a certain percentage, currently we're looking at 54, that needs to be reached. Letters from the parliamentary party, that means a vote of no confidence takes place, and then possibly a leadership election. There are other ways also, where that involves the councils. But the real problem for Boris Johnson here is people are sick of lockdowns. The government that implemented lockdowns now seems to have known that there wasn't anything to fear from a quick drink with a colleague in a park somewhere, and that while the nation mourned the symbolism of the death of the regent, or not the regent, the Prince Philip, the government who forced the symbol of British unity to sit alone and mourn alone, they were partying it up on more than one occasion. That cuts quite through. People like Andrew Bridgen, staunch Boris loyalists for many, many years, have now turned on him, calling for him to resign and being quite disgusted by the spectacle, as I think most people should be.
Sara, your thoughts before we close up?
Yeah, I think the problem with having had a third party, I mean, literally party as in drinks and snacks, come to light, is that it was one party too many, and clearly there seems to be an indication in this case that he knew about it, if not directly participated in it. And I have to say, I was going to say the inner socialist comes out of me when I would hear that my president or prime minister is parting when they have slapped down restrictions that are questionable. And even if they weren't that questionable at the time, because one didn't know what was going on, it's not a good look. And I think there's a point has been tipped with Boris on this one. You can never be sure of Boris, but I wouldn't sleep that easy if I were him.
And a last thing that we should understand about the Conservative Party is it's the oldest political party in the world still operative. And one of the reasons they've been able to survive is, number one, they've over the centuries moved from being on the right of the spectrum to the left of the spectrum, all those kind of things, but they're also very demanding of their leaders. If you stop winning as a Conservative Party leader, you are likely going to be the victim of regicide. If this goes back, I mean, in recent memory, we saw it with Ted Heath, we saw it with Margaret Thatcher, we saw it with David Cameron, even William Hague and Michael Howard in between, we saw it with Theresa May. And if Boris becomes an electoral liability rather than an electoral asset, the Tory party is likely to get all regicidal in its face.
Well, we'll have to see. It's certainly going to be exciting times in UK politics. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much, and we will see you tomorrow on the Daily Fringe Show. Cheers, everyone.